Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. Michel de Montaigne begins his essay on repenting by talking about his larger project in the essays. And by the time that he's writing this, we're talking about quite a few years of writing and publishing these essays. So it's to some degree retrospective. He's telling us, the readers, how he views his own work and why he's doing it before he's actually going to get to the topic of repenting. So he starts out by saying others form human beings, or man, l'homme. I give an account of man. And so that's rather general, but then he switches to something very particular. I sketch a picture of a particular one of them, that's Montaigne himself, who is very badly formed. Now, it's a very funny expression in French because it's bien mal formé, right? Bien and mal should be opposites to each other, but in this case, quite or very, the bien is a forceful, intensifying adjective, a very poorly formed person. And he says, whom I would truly make very different from what he is if I had to fashion him afresh, a counterfactual that, of course, cannot be realized. Wouldn't all of us, given the opportunity, if we're being honest, probably remake ourselves in some ways, change some things about ourselves? But as Montaigne points out, there's really nothing you can do along those lines at this point. He says, it's done now. And he talks about his portrait. And here he's going to bring in another very interesting theme. He talks about the brush strokes of my portrait change and varies. Why? The world is a perennial seesaw, everything within it. And he talks about some pretty old things, the mountains of the Caucasus. Okay, those have been around a long time. The pyramids of Egypt, a little bit less time, waver with a constant motion and their own. And then he says constancy itself is not really fully constant. It's a more languid rocking to and fro. So everything is in motion, everything changes. And he says, I'm unable to stabilize my subject, and I grasp it as it is now at this moment when I'm lingering over it. And then we get this very famous passage where he says, I am not portraying being, but becoming. But what he's actually saying is, I'm not portraying being, but rather something in process, something that is a passage, right? In French, paysage. This is an important idea. We're looking at moving targets, so we're never going to get the one single perfect picture of everything that's going on. When he says, this isn't the passage from one age to another, but from day to day, from minute to minute. I adapt this account of myself to the passing hour. I shall perhaps change soon, not accidentally, but intentionally, right? So there's different possibilities for the change. And he says that this is a register, meaning his works, of varied and changing occurrences, ideas which are unresolved and, when needs be, contradictory to each other, either because I myself have become different, so what I thought, what I experienced, what I understood at time X is not the same as at time Y, or because I grasp hold of different attributes or aspects of my subject. So I may happen, he says, to contradict myself, but I will never contradict truth. So there are going to be tensions, to say the least, oppositions, some contradictions. And then he goes on to talk about his own soul. He says, if my soul could only find a footing, I would not be assaying, testing myself, but resolving myself. But my soul, unfortunately, or as it so happens, is always in apprenticeship. Apprentissage, right? It's literally the same term, and being itself tested. So I am expounding, a lowly kind of ordinary existence. And then he says something really interesting here. He talks about the entirety, the whole, the tout of moral philosophy. You can attach the entirety of moral philosophy to what he calls a commonplace and private life, just as well as to one of richer stuff. So you could take anybody, so long as they are reflective and they are willing to think about their own life. You can do moral philosophy from that standpoint. You don't need to be in some fancy place with great professors and, the pedigree that you need or the right trainers. Anybody could really do it if they wanted to. And why? He says, well, every person bears the entire form of the human condition. So we're all in a situation where we could engage in moral philosophy. Not just moralizing, not just having opinions, but doing philosophy. And so he says, authors typically communicate themselves to the public by some peculiar mark foreign to themselves. I, the first to do it by my universal being, as Michel de Montaigne, right? And he says, if people are going to complain that I talk too much about myself, I'm going to complain they never even think about their own selves. And what does he mean by saying this? Well, a lot of people, if we look at the examples that he brings up, will communicate as a grammarian or a poet or as a lawyer, a jurisconsult. He's saying, listen, I'm going to communicate as the person who I actually am. That doesn't mean he doesn't have qualities. He is, in a noble house. He has commanded people in military operations. He is a man of letters. He has done a lot of different things, but he's not going to rely on those as sort of like a institutional or role mask for what he has to say. So then he brings up some possible objections somebody might have. Is it reasonable that I, who am so private in my habits, in my usage, my way of doing things, should claim to make public this knowledge of myself? Now, how is he doing that? Well, writing and publishing the essays. A little bit later in the piece, he's actually going to talk about how he publishes these in different places. And he says, in my own climate of Gascony, they find it funny to see me in print. I'm valued the more, the farther from home knowledge of me has spread. In Guyenne, I have to pay my printers. I have to get the book self-published. Elsewhere, they pay me. Right? So he's clearly got a lot of these essays out there. And so somebody could say, well, why are you, a person who in your own actual life is so withdrawn and private and reserved, why are you putting all this stuff out there? Is it you want everybody to know who you are? And he says, is it reasonable I should expose to a world in which grooming is such credit and artifice, such authority, the crude and simple effects of nature, and such a weakling nature too? I'm not somebody special. Is writing a book without knowledge or art not like building a wall without stones and so on? I'm not a particularly learned person. And he says, well, the fancies of the muses are governed by art. Mine, by chance. I do have some things recommending me, however. He says that never did a man treat a subject which he knew or understood better than I know and understand the subject which I've undertaken. In that respect, I'm the most learned man alive. Now, what is the subject? Well, it's partly himself, but it's partly his observations of other people, right? His experience and his reflections on that experience. So nobody, knows that subject quite so well as he does. He also says nobody's gone more deeply into their subject matter than I have as well. This particular subject matter, who I am and what I've observed and reflected upon in the world. Nobody's ever stripped bare its own peculiar members and consequences, or reached more precisely or more fully the goal he'd proposed for his endeavor. In fact, what he needs for this job is something that he actually does have available: fidelity. That is faithfulness, a kind of loyalty to the truth in reporting it, right? And he not only says that he has fidelity to contribute, he has the most pure and sincere fidelity. So that's pretty, good. He says, I tell the truth, not enough to make me replete, but as much as I dare. As I grow older, I dare a little bit more. For custom concedes to old age a greater license to chatter more indiscreetly about oneself. And then he brings up another really interesting point. He says, in this, something doesn't happen that does often happen in other cases. The craftsperson, Montaigne himself, and the work, the besoin, the task, the essays, they do not contradict each other. So contraire, right? So what does that mean? Well, the task is something that he can actually carry out. They don't get in the way. And he says that my book and I go harmoniously forward at the same pace. Elsewhere you can commend, that is to praise, or to condemn, to blame, a work independently of its author, but not here. Touch one, and you touch the other. So anyone who criticizes it without knowing that it will harm himself more than me, anyone who does know it has satisfied me completely, I will be blessed beyond my merit if public approval will allow me this much, that I have made intelligent people realize that I would have been capable of profiting from learning if I had any, and that I deserved more help from my memory. So this is a reflection placing his own limited capacities and efforts into context before he turns to his main subject, that of the act of repenting.